Um, Great. Okay. So yeah, welcome everyone to our SpellPundit Spelling Bee webinars for October and November. This is the third part of the series. Just as an overview, we did our first session one on basic dictionary skills and spelling rules a couple weeks ago, and then our second session was on prefixes, suffixes, and roots. If you haven't watched those or didn't attend those live, they're on the SpellPundit YouTube page. So we definitely recommend watching them, since all three of these are very important and very core skills to becoming a good speller. Today's session is around language patterns, which I will talk about what those are in a second if you're not familiar with that. And it's the third kind of element or third program of this webinar series. So so the first thing I want to kind of go over is why it is important to learn language patterns. So a language pattern, first of all, is a sequence of letters that is associated with a sound that shows up very frequently in a language. And so you'll have a lot of words that are derived from German, for example, that will have SCH used for the SH sound. Or you'll have a lot of words from, like French, for example, that have ET for the A sound. And so knowing these language patterns is really important to be able to piece together words using them. And the spellers who are the best at using language patterns actually don't really memorize every word, and they're able to use these different language patterns to make very educated guesses about words that they don't know. So you can hear the word, you can hear the language of origin, definitions, other things, and create a very educated guess about how the word might be spelled. And so that's the point that it's really hard to memorize every word in the dictionary. And so that's the point that you probably want to get to, is where you can, for words that you don't know or haven't studied before, you can make those really strong guesses. And so language patterns is one piece of that. Roots and the general spelling rules that we talked about in the previous two sessions are also other components of that. And one thing I forgot to mention also is, if there are any questions, feel free to put those in the chat, and we can I can answer them out loud, or we'll answer them in the chat. But one other thing I want to emphasize is that these language patterns are patterns and not like 100% rules. So what this means is that in different languages, when you'll have these language patterns that we will talk about today, but that there will usually, in a lot of cases, be exceptions to these rules. The most, I guess, a question we get a lot then is like, why do you need to learn these language patterns? Why not just memorize every word? It is actually more efficient to first focus on learning the patterns and then focus on memorizing exceptions to the rules, instead of right now focusing so much on like, oh, but this German word is spelled this way instead of this language pattern that you told us. Those are much fewer in number compared to the words that do adhere to these language patterns. And so it's more efficient to learn the language patterns first and then find the exceptions and memorize those exceptions than it is to, at the forefront, really focus on those exceptions. So that's basically how we think about language patterns. Wanted to give an example of how we use language patterns first before diving into a bunch of different examples of these patterns. So I haven't put the word on the screen, but so the word is mozzarella. And so some of you might know how to spell that, but if we think about it from the approach of language patterns, the first maybe area that you might get confused around is the tsa sound, so the matza sound, and what that consonant is, whether that's can be spelled TZ or TS or ZZ. There's a lot of different options, probably even more options than I put on this page, that you can use to spell that z sound. But in this case, you know that this word is from Italian origin, and in Italian, which we will talk about a little bit later as well, the ZZ sound is super common for the ts sound. And so you can make this educated guess that mozzarella is spelled with the ZZ for that ts sound. And then maybe later in the word, you might be a little bit unsure if this is spelled mozzarella ELLA or mozzarella ELA. And so then what you can go from there is, you know, that words in Italian like tend to have lots of double consonants. If you know more about roots also, you know that ella, ella is a diminutive suffix, but forgetting about that right now, if you know language patterns, Italian has a lot of double words or double letters, double consonants, then you'll know that the ella makes more sense for Italian than ela. And so then you can make the guess there that mozzarella is spelled with an ella. And then you'd have the word correct, basically. So that's kind of an example of like how we use language patterns to piece together words and like understand how to spell certain sounds. We'll show a lot more examples later, but that's at a very high level, that's the general principle and like the kind of thought process that you'll see really advanced spellers using when they use language patterns. And then one thing we also want to highlight is that we do discuss language patterns in the SpellPundit software. So this side is on the learning mode. Under additional information for a lot of words, we do have information about language patterns. And so while you're studying the word, you can often read this section and see that like in French, the sh sound is spelled with a ch and the a sound is spelled with an e, for example, and then use that to help you learn a word better, as well as like generalize those language patterns to other words that you might see. And then in the testing mode, we'll also include that information for you as well. Once, like after you've misspelled a word, we'll give you that information. So yeah, we have these in SpellPundit, and we definitely encourage them as definitely encourage reading them as you're preparing different words in SpellPundit. Now for the actual patterns. So first pattern I want to start with is from Latin. So what we'll do is basically I'll talk through about 6 or 7 examples of language patterns in Latin, and then we'll have a couple of different example words, and then people can guess. You all can put your answers in the chat, and then we will basically kind of use those to be like more interactive examples where you can test and learn how to apply these language patterns. So first language pattern for Latin here is the E sound, especially when it's at the end of a word and that word is a plural. So examples of this is algae, the singular is alga, the plural is algae, and you're able to, one second, sorry. Okay. So yeah, the singular is alga, the plural is algae, and it's pronounced with the E sound. So the AE is pronounced with that E sound. Same thing for larva, the plural is larva. The singular is larva, the plural is larvae, and you have that E sound as well. Antenna, antennae is the same exact example. One thing to note also is that for a lot of these examples, you can pronounce them with the I sound. And these will often show up as like alternate pronunciation. So for algae, you can also, larva is a better example. For larvae, you can also pronounce it larvae. For antennae, you can also pronounce it antennae. And so the dictionary will often have both definitions. So in a spelling bee, if you're asking for alternate pronunciations, it's likely that that E sound as well as the I sound will both come up for these types of words. Next example is around the I sound at the end of a plural noun. And so this is words like fungi, where the singular is fungus and the plural is fungi. With cactus as well, the singular is cactus, the plural is cacti. And then with alumnus, the singular is alumnus, the plural is alumni. And in these cases, the I sound, when you just have the I sound, is spelled with an I. And then the E sound, you'll have an E sound and sometimes an I sound. That should be spelled AE. And so that's generally a language pattern for how plurals in Latin will work. In Latin, the K sound is spelled with a C. Latin in general, if you get a word that's from Latin, it's very, very unlikely that it will have a K. And so for the K sound in Latin, you should pretty much always use the letter C. And so words like candidate, execute, locate, all have that K sound spelled with a C. Going into some more Latin patterns, the F sound is pronounced with an F in Latin. So this is relatively straightforward. In other languages like Greek, it's spelled with a PH, but in Latin, it will be spelled with an F. And so if you ask the language of origin of a word and you hear that it's from Latin, you should probably go with an F instead of a PH, for example. And so examples of this are calify, coffer, vitrify, vivify, amplify, and defect. And yeah, so this is relatively straightforward in Latin. If you have the U sound and the U sound in Latin, this is also spelled with the U. So again, very straightforward. So latitude, cupreus, deuterium are all spelled with a U. And you don't have to add any extra letters or get very fancy with it. Latin is generally very straightforward. And then the last example for Latin is the qua sound, which is always spelled with a QU in Latin. And this is a rule that has very, very few exceptions. Like you'll never see these spelled with like a KW or any sort of other letter combination. So words like aquiline and then quidnunc are good examples in Latin of the QU sound being pronounced as a qua. Cool. So kind of want to do a couple of interactive examples to see how people are feeling about this. So I will show the definition of a word and the pronunciation of a word, and I will say it. And if everyone can put the spelling in the group chat based on some language patterns that we just talked about, we'll put it in the chat, and then I will reveal the correct spelling after that. So first word.
Excuse me. Someone locked the chat.
Yeah, it is disabled.
Okay, can we unlock the chat?
Okay, let me take care of that one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Cool. So first word is Latin, and it's pronounced Lily-ace. This one is a little bit difficult, but let's see. Let's give it all our best tries. This is a family of monocotyledonous plants, which basically just means it has like one reproductive organ in the plant. So let's see what people are guessing. Okay, lots of correct examples. So one hint here is that the E sound is spelled with an AE in Latin. And so one thing to remember, it looks like most people got that ending correct though. So that is good. And then, yeah, the correct spelling is Lilaceae. The ACEAE actually is a very common Latin root, which basically is relevant to any sort of genus or family or just categorization of living beings and taxonomy. And so it's a pretty common ending you'll see in Latin, but it also follows language patterns. And so yeah, that's this first example. So let's move on to one more or another example, also a Latin word. It's pronounced calculi, and this is a branch of mathematics involving integration. And so based off what we know about language patterns, let's make some guesses. Okay. Pronunciation is calculi. Okay. So the I at the end of a plural noun is spelled with an I. The I sound is spelled with an I. And so that's the hint that we have here. Correct spelling is Calculi. One thing to just clarify really quickly, some people did guess with a Q. The reason it wouldn't be with the Q is because the QU is associated with the qua sound, and then the sound in this word is the kya sound. So instead of like in the pronunciation marks right here, we have a KY, but it would only be a Q if it was like a KW sound, which sounds like a qua. And so that's why this is spelled with the CU. But yeah, other than that, it has Cs, which is also really common in Latin, as opposed to Ks. And then we also have the I for the plural noun.
Excuse me. So, what was the language pattern from Latin that we used in Liliaceae?
For Liliaceae, we have the examples here. Yeah, basically the E sound is spelled with an AE. So you have the A,
Oh, okay.
E, basically. Yeah. Great. Okay. One more example of Latin. You have the word dugong or dugong. Just this word also has some other influences, but is a primarily Latin word. And this is a large marine mammal that inhabits warm coastal waters. And so, oh, sorry. We'll come back to that, but if people want to put guesses in the chat. Great. So the hint we have is that the U sound is spelled, the U and U sound is spelled with the U. And so then we get the correct spelling that most people have guessed, which is D-U-G-O-N-G for dugong or dugong. All right.
Wait, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what would be the pronunciation if it was like a combining form like EU? Would it also be pronounced U?
So the EU is not a common, well, and we'll see this later, but the EU is not a common, it's not a common sequence of letters that's used in Latin. It's used in Greek words, but not Latin words. And so I will talk about that more when we get to Greek, but in Latin words, you should not guess EU like that. It's relatively uncommon that that will come up in Latin because EU comes from Greek basically. And so, yeah, if that answers your question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, this next word is acquisition, which is the the act of gaining. And so if we can make some guesses. Okay, looks like most people have this right. So one thing to point out is the qua sound is spelled with the QU, like we just talked about earlier. Another thing to point out is that the shun sound in Latin is spelled with the TION, like TI in Latin often makes a sh sound. And so the word acquisition is spelled ACQUISITION. Okay, so that's it for Latin, and we'll move on to Greek. And so Greek and Latin generally are similar, but there are some key differences that make the words look different. And so the first one that is very big that most people will see almost immediately is that in Greek words, the F sound, the F sound is pronounced with a PH. In Latin, like we said, it's an F, but in Greek, it's most of the time it's a PH sound. And so words like alphabet, philosophy, telephone, all come from Greek and they all have that PH sound. The I sound in Greek, in a lot of cases, is spelled with a Y. And so it can be spelled with a Y or an I. And so the key in Greek is, especially once you know roots as well, you can kind of understand where the Y's come up. But for the sake of language patterns, a Y is a common way to spell the I sound in Greek. And so for words like abyss and synonyms and Olympic, we have the Y sound. But like I said, the I sound is also like the I is actually used in Greek a lot. Like for Olympic, this is the I sound. And then for the pick, also, this is an I sound, but it's spelled with an I. And so kind of, yeah, understanding like what those, understanding the differences, like when a Y is used and when an I is used is usually comes down to knowing roots really well, which was, like we said, last week's session, but yeah, that's a general Greek language pattern. The next one is the K sound in Greek, which is, it can be spelled with a C, a K, or a CH. And so in Latin, like we said, it's usually only a C, but in Greek, it can be spelled in all of these different ways. And again, it usually comes down to knowing what roots are, like what roots are associated with the different words to know like which one is whether to use the CK or the CH. The most common one is usually, I think it depends on roots also, but the most common are usually the C and the CH. The K is a little bit less common, but you'll still see it in some words. So for the democracy, the K sound is spelled with a C, and that's because kratos basically means government in Greek. And so knowing the root helps you know like language pattern, which one of these it is most likely to be. With chaos, it's spelled with a CH, which is one of the more common spellings for the K sound in Greek. And then for kinetic, it's spelled with a K. And then this is because the KINE basically means like energy or movement in Greek. And so knowing that root helps you know like which one of those three options you have for that K sound. The A sound in Greek can be spelled with an A or it can be spelled with an E, depending on the word. For the A sound, like one example is macron. So you have the macron sound here. And then for the E, this word is pronounced koine. And so this E is making the A sound. And usually for words that are more like older Greek, and you can kind of tell sometimes by like the definition if it's referring to like some Greek mythological thing or some like ancient Greek thing, then you'll have the E sound more likely. And if it's a more like newer Greek word, it will have that, it'll be spelled with an A. So that's how you can kind of think to differentiate that a little bit. And then this goes back to the previous question we had where you have the U sound or the U sound. And in Greek, that is often spelled with an EU. In Latin, we said it was a U. In Greek, it's mostly an EU. EU in Greek also is a root that means good. And so that's another way to know whether to spell it with an EU. And so words like euonym, this means good name. Eu is good, onym is name. Euplastic, euchromosome, euform, euphoria, euphemism. All of these different words are examples of the EU sound in Greek. So yeah, that's the example.
Is koine the singular of koinonia?
I don't think it is. I think it's a separate word, but they might have a similar root.
Okay, because that reminded me of, and I literally saw this like right before this class, that Karthik, the 2018 Spelling Bee champion, spelled koinonia to become champion.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is true. That is true. They're probably related, but it's not, they're not like, they have the same root, but they're not related words. Okay, so for more Greek patterns, the R sound is spelled with a RH in Greek, especially when it's at the beginning of a word. And so that's why you get words like rhinoceros, which is the RHIN, instead of like RIN, for example, or rhombus, rhabdomancy, rheum, rhizome. These are all spelled with RH instead of just an R. Yeah, and I like with Greek, a lot of other Greek words, you can tell, or you can get another hint just by knowing roots, like rhizome, rise means rice, for example. Rhabdo, I believe, means rod in Greek. And so sometimes you can know by the roots also whether it's an R or an RH, but if you get the R sound at the beginning of a word in Greek, it's usually an RH. Similarly, if you get the Z sound at the beginning of a Greek word, it can be spelled with an X. It can also sometimes be spelled just with the Z, but it also comes down to roots there. But some examples of X are, this word is pronounced xanthochroi, this word is pronounced xanthoria, xenon, xenia, xylem, xylophone, and xyloid. And so you can kind of see that the X sound is making the Z sound, or sorry, the X letter is making the Z sound in these Greek words. There are other words in Greek like zoology, zoology is one example where it starts with a Z. And like I said, the way you can tell this apart is by roots. Like, for example, xantho means yellow, I believe. And so like, that's how you know that's an X. Whereas for zoology, the zoa means animal. And so then you would know it's a Z. And so you can use roots to kind of tell, which one is also, which one you should use in a particular context, especially for Greek. And then the last one is the sa sound in Greek. When it's at the beginning of a word, it's often spelled with a PS. So examples of this are psychology, psalm, pseudology, and then psyllium. Again, also there are Greek words that do start with an S, and then you come back to roots to know maybe like how to differentiate a little bit, but PS is a little bit more common, especially when it's at the beginning of a word. And when you have the S sound in the middle of words, it will usually be like just the letter S. And but like roots, for example, psych means mind, pseudo means like false. And so you can use roots also to help you with this. So Greek and Latin are very unique in that roots are helpful. And then we'll get into some other languages in a bit that don't have as many roots. And so language patterns become a little bit more important, but that is generally speaking different language patterns you can expect to see in Greek. Okay, so let's go back and do a couple of different examples of Greek words. So our first word, Greek, is pronounced alphabet. I think we saw this one, but it's a set of letters or language of a language arranged in an order. And so I can put some guesses in the chat. Okay, looks like most people are getting this correct, but yeah, the language pattern here is that the F sound is spelled with a PH. And so the correct spelling of this is ALPHABET. Next example that we have is also Greek, and then the word is dichotomy. And so this is a division into two. And so let's see some guesses for this. Okay. All right, looks like everyone's also on the right track for this. The k sound, which is the most difficult part of this word, is spelled with a CH in Greek. And so that's why you can, that's why this word is spelled DICHOTOMY.
How would you tell the difference, like between CH and C?
To some extent, that comes from where it's placed in the word. Like I said earlier, it's also based on roots. But in Greek, CH is the most common usually. So if you're ever unsure, that's the one I would go with. Great. Then another example, this word is Greek, and then the word is rheology, and this is a science dealing with the flow of matter. So any guesses for this one?
Can you please repeat the word?
The word is rheology.
Okay.
Okay, looks like people are guessing this too. So the hint here, the language pattern here is that the R sound is spelled with an RH, especially at the beginning of words in Greek. And so the correct spelling of this would be RHEOLOGY. Right, another Greek example is xenium. This is a present that is given among the ancient Greeks and Romans to a guest or stranger. Okay, lots of guesses.
So I have a question.
Pattern here is that the Z sound is spelled, especially at the beginning of a word, is spelled with an X. And so the correct spelling of this would be XENIUM. And you can also, if you know Greek and Latin roots as well, XEN means zeno means stranger in Greek. And so because this is given to a guest or a stranger, that's also how you can differentiate between the X and the Z as well.
I have a question. So when it comes to Greek and Latin roots, or for example, a root like orth or ortha, they often have like alterations like ORTH and ORTHI. How do we know if we need to use ORTHI or ORTH when we are spelling a word?
Yeah, so most of the time you will hear it in the word. Like if it's orthogonal, for example, you'll know it's an O versus an I, for example. Sometimes if you just can't tell, then the general rule, which I think we covered in the first session that we did, the dictionary rules and general spelling rules, is that the I is more commonly used in Latin for the schwa sound, which is the sound, and then O is more commonly used in Greek for that same sound.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Yes, and if people could just type their spelling one time, that's enough. We can, we'll see it the first time, and that is good enough. So yeah. Great. So moving into French. The French is a fun language. I always found it super hard when I was a speller, but it's exciting because it's so difficult sometimes. There's a lot of different ways to spell the same sounds in French. And one example of that is that the O sound in French can be spelled with an EAU or it can be spelled with an AU. The EAU, to differentiate between these, EAU is more commonly at the end of words, and then AU is more commonly in the middle of words. So example of this is plateau. So plateau has the EAU at the end of the word, and then mauve, which has AU because that sound is in the middle of the word. And so that's generally a good rule to tell this apart. But yeah, so multiple ways to spell that O sound.
Is it possible for like you guys to like send us the previous recordings, because I couldn't attend them?
We're putting, like I said this at the beginning, we're putting all of the recordings on YouTube.
Oh.
If you go to the SpellPundit YouTube page, you'll see all of this and this recording as well.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Yeah, so next is the et sound in French, which is spelled ETTE. ETTE is also what is called like a diminutive suffix. So basically means like it makes the core of the word smaller and female in French. So pirouette, for example, has the et sound, which is spelled ETTE. And then layette also has the et sound, which is ETTE as well. Sometimes you'll see the ET sound, you'll see the et sound being spelled ET in French. And those are only, that like basically shows up in words that have like very heavy Latin influences. So if the word is like Latin from French, then it might be ET instead of ETTE. But if the word is a pure French word, it will be ETTE. And so sometimes like if that's something you're confused about, that's how you can tell them apart. The U sound can be spelled OU, U, or IEU. And so this also kind of depends on context, but that, for example, boutique is spelled BOUTIQUE, tutu is TUTU, and then lieutenant is LIEUTENANT. And so a couple of different ways that you can spell that U sound in French, and it really kind of depends on the word and the context and everything like that as well. Yeah, for more French examples, the sh sound is spelled with a CH in French. So instead of using an SH, it's usually spelled with a CH. So examples of this are chagrin, chaise, and champagne. And so all of those have the sh sound, but are spelled with a CH. And then this last one, the A sound in French, is always something I found super, super difficult because there's like 8 different ways you can spell it, which is fun. And so, for example, you have the A sound can be spelled with an E. So you have like attaché and you have ombre. And so those are some examples where it ends with an E. You can have it end with an ER sound. So you have like semenye, kahie, and those are the ER basically makes that A sound. You can have ET be the A sound. So words like adre, guichet, you have the A sound spelled as ET. Can also be EE. So melee, entree, that A sound is spelled with an EE. Can have an AI, so like AI or AIS. So Beaujolais, that A sound is spelled with an AIS. In Milanese, it's spelled with an AI. And so those are also ways you can see it spelled. There's also AIT. So refait, au fait, parfait is another common example. And then you can also have it spelled AY. So satané, paysan. And I think the question that will come up here is like, how do you tell this all apart? But it is definitely difficult. It's kind of one of the hardest parts of French is understanding this sound. What has like worked for me in the past is like if you can understand, like for example, the A sound is usually when it has like a lot of Latin influence, for example, or like English influence, and so it's not like a pure French word, and so then you'll have A versus any of those other like the AY versus any of those other spellings, or after a certain point, once you see a lot of these French words and a lot of the words with this ending sound, you can kind of develop a small like intuition to know like which words are spelled which ways. But yeah, there's no easy fix for this one. There's a lot of different ways that A sound can be spelled.
I have a question. So where can I find, for example, if I want to make a list of words of, for example, French words that end with the A sound that end with ET specifically, where should I just Google up words that end?
No,
with-
you can go on Merriam-Webster's Unabridged and you can just put an asterisk before whatever you want, and then that'll pop up every single word that has that sort of ending.
Yeah, I think this is probably this is a very different conversation, I think, and can definitely be something that we talk. If you email us, we can definitely give more information about that. That gets into like how you use the dictionary and is much more complicated, and it's not something we have time to talk about today, but yeah.
I have a question. For the A sound. Can it also be spelled AU?
In French, I don't know that there's a lot of examples where the A sound is spelled AU. Do you have a particular word in mind?
No, I don't.
The AU sound in French, sorry, one sec. The AU sound in French is usually pronounced with an O. It's like mauve. There's another word, auteur, AU.
Chateau.
Yeah, chateau is EAU, but yeah, the AU is pronounced with an O in French typically.
Wouldn't like a word like baguette technically is that BAU? So
That
wouldn't
is BAGQETTE.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, more French patterns. There's a lot of these. The K sound in French, especially when it's at the end of a word, is spelled with the QUE. So antique, grotesque, cinq are all French words that have that K sound spelled with the QUE. Same thing with the G sound at the end of a word. So gigue, vogue, morgue, intrigue, fugue, all have the G sound at the end of a word, which is spelled with the GUE. You have the N plus Y sound, which is kind of said as nia, which is spelled with a GN. So examples are beignet, which again is ET as the A sound, and then rognon, which has that GN and Y sound, nia sound. And then for the sound, at the end of a word, most of the time, this is when this comes up, is you have the spelling as EUR. So friseur, persifleur, jongleur. And so, yeah, another language pattern in French there. And then for the aj sound at the end of every word, or sorry, at the end of French words. So the ja, the zh is pronounced ja. And so that will be spelled with an age. So like garage is garage, homage, triage, sabotage, it's double, fuselage, camouflage, mirage, are all spelled with that age spelling in
You
French.
just go back to the EUR words again. I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, the EUR words are, it's pronounced freezer, persifleur, jongleur. Yeah, we'll also be putting this recording on the website. So if you don't get everything now, you can refer back to that, or sorry, on the YouTube for SpellPundit. So you can refer back to things later. Great. And so next language pattern is the odd sound at the end of every word. Or sorry, this is the aid sound, but it can also, or yeah, sorry, that should be odd. Odd or aid. So this example, barricade is pronounced aid. Crusade is pronounced aid. This one would be facade. So that's a slightly different pronunciation where the odd sound is spelled ade. Crustade is very similar. The odd sound is spelled ade. Promenade, another example of that. Tirade is slightly different. That's pronounced aid. And then saccade is ade. So all of them are, the spelling will be ade, but it can be pronounced aid or odd depending on the word. And then this last example is the y plus a sound at the end of every word. So that sounds like yay. And so that will be spelled as an IER in French when it's at the end of a word. So dossier, costumier, atelier. So that IER at the end of a word is pronounced yay in French.
Excuse me. So you're saying that there's like Greek words, French words, Latin words. Are there any like English words, sort of?
So the way that English works and why it's such a hard language to learn how to spell is because words, pretty much every word in English is taken from another language. And so like, yes, you have some words that are core English, which we will actually talk about a little bit later in this presentation, but you also have many, many words in English that are taken from Greek, Latin, French, Spanish, Italian, German. And so when you're in a spelling bee to ask the language of origin, they'll tell you like this word was derived from these different languages before coming to English. So they're all English words, but they come from other languages before entering English because English adopts words from a lot of different languages.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's do some examples. And just a reminder, if everyone is messaging in the chat, just say the word one time and then you're done. So the word is potpourri. This is a jar of flower petals mixed with spices and used for scent or perfume. And you can think of some French language patterns for how this might be spelled. Okay. So a couple of language pattern hints here is that the O sound is spelled OT in French. The T's are usually silent in French. The O sound is spelled OU, so potpourri, that sound is spelled OU, and then the E sound at the end of a word usually is spelled with an I. And so the correct spelling here you get is POTPOURRI for potpourri. Then next example, let's try this one. This is traîneau, and it means a sled or a sleigh. Pronunciation is traîneau. Okay, great. Yeah, so the A sound in French, like we said, can be spelled with an AI, and then the O sound at the end of a word is spelled EAU. And so based on that, traîneau is spelled TRAINEAU. Great. One more French example, this word is pronounced moulage, and it's a mold or cast for use in a medical treatment. Amazing. Okay, so language patterns for this is that the oo sound is spelled with an OU, and then the aj sound is spelled with an AGE. So this word is spelled MOULAGE, moulage.
I have a question. Does it ever happen that in French there's a word that's spelled with double O's?
Pretty unlikely in French. Usually the oo sound is spelled with an OU.
Okay.
Okay, and then I think this is our last French example. This word is hauteur or auteur. It means a haughty manner or spirit, arrogance. All right. Yeah, so the language patterns here is that the O sound is spelled with an AU, and then the sound is spelled at the end of a word is spelled EUR. And yeah, this is also a French kind of root, or like a common root in French where EUR at the end of a word means like one who does. And so the spelling for this is HAUTEUR, auteur. All right, this one, lots of French examples. I think, yeah, this is actually our last one. So this is pronounced sachet, and it has that A sound at the end of a word. So lots of different ways you could try to spell that. And this is a small bag or packet containing dried scented material used to scent clothes. All right, and the language pattern hints we have are that the sh sound is spelled with a CH in French, and then the A sound is spelled with an ET in French, in this particular case. Again, like we said, lots of different ways to spell that sound, but for this word, it's spelled with an ET. So the spelling is SACHET for sachet. Yeah, and people are saying this in the chat. There is a homonym for this word, which basically means that there's another word with the same pronunciation, but a different meaning. That one is spelled SASHAY, and it's like a type of a walk, basically. So you can tell these two words apart based on their definitions. All right, moving on to another language, into Spanish. Yeah, so for Spanish, we have the A sound in Spanish, which is usually spelled with the E. So examples of this are padre and then mesa. Then we have the ya sound in Spanish, which is usually spelled with an LL. So examples of this are like tortilla and caballo. One example down here, quesadilla. The ha sound in Spanish is very often spelled with the J, but occasionally sometimes can be spelled with the G. And so examples of this are jicama, where the J letter makes a ha sound, junta, where the J letter makes a ha sound again, and then ajitanado, where the G is actually making an H sound. If you're ever stuck between the two, go with J. This is much more common, but there are a small number of words in Spanish where the G sound also makes that ha sound. If you have the E in Spanish, that's spelled E sound, that's spelled with an I. So jicama, chapin, and then encina. So if you get the E sound in Spanish, spell that with an I. And then this one is the ka sound in Spanish, can be spelled with either a C or a QU. One way to tell this apart is that the C is usually used if a word has like more Latin influences. So if it's Latin and Spanish, then you use C. And if it's more like pure traditional Spanish that has not been like altered by other languages, the QU is a little bit more common. So cacao is Spanish plus a couple of like Native American languages, for example, and so that's why it's a C. Flamenco is also a C, whereas quesadilla is with the Q. And also in Spanish, queso, QUESO, means cheese. So that's another way you can kind of use to define that QU. More examples here is in Spanish, the ñ sound is spelled with an N. In Spanish, it's spelled with like N with like a squiggly line on top, but when it's moved into English, that squiggly line is taken off and they just become N's. But so you have cabana, which is spelled with an N, piñata spelled with an N, mañana spelled with an N, and then señorita spelled with an N. And so that nia sound is spelled with an N in Spanish. If you ever have the K sound in Spanish, that's spelled with a QUE. So this word is quebracho, queña, quesadilla, quebrada, quebracho. And so this is more common at the beginning of words, but sometimes also at the very end of words. But that K sound is spelled with a QUE. And then very similarly, the gay sound is spelled with the GUE. So vargueño, malagueña, use that GUE for the gay sound.
Excuse me. So any words that have the tilde in Spanish, when they're in the English form, they just remove the tilde, right?
Yeah. And in spelling bees, they don't ask you to say any of those special characters. So you can just say an N. And that's what they will be looking for.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. In Spanish, also last language pattern here is the ra sound, which in Spanish is often spelled with double R's. So Alcaraza, Serrano, sorry, that's a typo, that should just be 2 R's. But Alcaraza and Serrano are 2 examples where you have the R sound, but it's spelled with 2 R's. Cool, let's try a couple of Spanish words. So Spanish, this is pronounced azulejo, and this is a glazed ceramic tile of Portugal and Spain.
Excuse me.
Yes.
In a spelling bee, would like let's say there's an apostrophe, would they ask you to say the apostrophe?
No, you're just asked to say the letters of the word in the correct order.
Oh.
Okay, so this word is azulejo. Some hints are that the A sound, so azule, is usually spelled with an E, and then the ha sound is spelled with a J. So this spelling is azulejo. Cool. Then for this word, this is piloncillo, which is an unrefined sugar molded into cones or sticks. So let's see what guesses we get for this. Okay, so language pattern hints is that the E sound is spelled with an I, so P would be spelled P-I. The ya sound is spelled with an LL, so for the CO, spelled with an LL. And so the correct spelling we get here is Piloncillo, piloncillo. Cool, so that's for Spanish. Then moving into Italian. One thing also is that like Spanish, Italian, even to some extent French, they'll all have a little bit of similarity between them, and sometimes in terms of like language patterns, just because they're all very similar languages, they're all very like closely derived from Latin. And so a lot of the patterns we'll see in Italian will look somewhat similar to Spanish, but there will be some big differences also. One example of this is the E sound. So like in Spanish, it can be spelled with an I, but in Italian, it can also be spelled with an E. And so like spaghetti, you have, spaghetti is spelled with an I, macaroni spelled with an I, whereas minestrone, the E sound at the end is spelled with an E. And then the same thing goes for fettuccine. And then cognoscenti as well, that's spelled with an E. One thing to note is that cognoscenti is one example where you have like singular and plural in Latin. And so singular is usually spelled with a TE, and then the plural will be spelled with a TI. So if you get the word cognoscenti and you ask the part of speech and they tell you singular, spell it with an E, and if they tell you it's plural, spell it with an I. For the k sound in Italian, there's a lot of different ways to spell it. C, 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 H, C, C, H. Usually the CCH, you'll never see at the beginning of a word. And then the CC, you will also never see at the beginning of the word. But C or CH, you can see at the beginning of words. And then these two, CC and CCH, you'll see in the middle of words. So some examples are cantata with just the C, Chianti, which is the CH, stucco, which is the CC and is in the middle of the word, and then macchiato, which is CCH, and that's also in the middle of the word. Then you have the cha sound in Italian, which is not spelled with the CH, but is spelled with a CI. Or a CCI. And so words that you get are, and again, the CI you'll sometimes see at the beginning of words. One example is Cioppino, which is CIOPPINO, whereas the CCI you'll see in the middle of words. But you have the mostaccioli, cappuccino, and then this is, actually that's not the best example. That one's accelerando, but these are two good examples. Mostaccioli and cappuccino with the CCI in the middle of the word.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
For the I and E, which one is more common for like the previous slide?
The I is a little bit more common usually, but also, like I said, sometimes the part of speech will impact it, whereas the singular words will be spelled with an E and then the plural words are spelled with an I. But I is a little bit more common, generally speaking.
Oh, okay.
Which is more common between C, CC, and then CC, CH, and then CCH?
Yeah, that one's a little bit harder to say. Like I said, it's mostly that the C and CH are at the beginning of words, and then the CC, CCH are in the middle of words, and that's like the best way to tell them apart usually.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, then you have the J sound in Italian. So this can be spelled GI or GGI, just like that previous example with the C's. The GI will be used at the beginning of words, and then GGI will only be used in the middle of words. So you have this example, leggieramente, so GGI because it's in the middle of a word. Aggiornamento is the same thing. The GGI comes because it's in the middle of the word. And then Parmigiana is also, this one is just one G, but yeah, also in the middle of the word. But then you'll have words like giocoso, which is spelled GIOCOSO, where it doesn't make sense to put like a GG, like two G's at the beginning of the word. So that's sometimes how you can tell these apart.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Is the word arpeggio Italian or French?
It's Italian. Yeah, so that would be a good example of this one. ARPEGGIO is this example. Yeah. So next language pattern is the ts sound, which can be spelled with a Z or a ZZ. And so pizza is a very common word that we all say that has the ZZ sound. Mozzarella is the example I used at the beginning, but also has that that ZZ sound. And then nia, which is the N plus Y sound, pronounced nia, is spelled with the GN in Italian. And so examples of this would be lasagna, carmagnole, and agnolotti. And then this one more kind of rule for Italian generally is that it likes to repeat a lot of letters doubly. And so if you have consonants in Italian, having them repeat double is common. So L's, T's, R's, P's, and S's are kind of the most common examples, but you also you'll have like G's and C's like we talked about, Z's, lots of consonants will repeat twice. But yeah, examples of this would be fettuccine, where you have the two T's, the two C's, and two L's. So this word has all of them. Pappardelle, which has two P's and two L's. Terrazzo, which has two R's, two Z's. Basso, two S's, and then cavatappi, which has the two P's. So Italian will a lot of times just have like the double consonants repeating a lot. And so you can kind of make that decision to double a letter sometimes in Italian words.
I have a question. So like for the repeating consonants, is there a way like you can tell them in their pronunciation?
Usually it's just that part of the word will have like more emphasis on it. So like kava tapi is a good example, that like you have the api kind of, it's like a harder P. It's a little bit like, you know, it's a little bit not like, it's not a perfect sort of rule there, but yeah, that's the way you can kind of hear it.
Thank you.
I got a question. Is there a question session at the end of the Zoom meeting?
Yeah, we'll have some time for questions.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, and then the last two Italian rules that we have are the A sound, which usually at the end of the word will be spelled with an E. And so some examples of this are padre, volante, tagliatelle, where you have the A sound, but it's pronounced with an E. Then you have the ska sound. This is so SK, ska. In Italian, it's spelled with an SCH. So examples are maraschino. This can also be pronounced maraschino, but for this particular language pattern, maraschino. And then this one is scherzo. So the SCH is pronounced with a ska. Cool. So that's our list of Italian patterns. Let's try some examples. This word is carpaccio, or carpaccio, and it's a thinly sliced raw meat served with a sauce.
I think the chat is disabled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, you just re-enabled it. Okay. So the main kind of hint here is that the ch sound in Italian is spelled with a CC or CCI. And so then you get the correct spelling of CARPACCIO. So that's carpaccio. We had another example in Italian is appoggiatura, which is like an embellishing note or a tone. And so people can guess a little bit.
Could you pronounce it again?
Appoggiatura. Okay, so some hints here. The double consonant is common in Italian. And so one example that we see here is the P is a consonant that is repeated twice. And then the J sound is spelled with the GG. So, or GGI actually in this case. And so the correct spelling for this would be APPOGGIATURA, appoggiatura. Great. Then now we're kind of getting into like Old English, Middle English words. And so these are words that have kind of stayed as part of English. And so they'll have like some of their patterns of their own. So if you ask the language of origin for these words, they'll tell you like Old English or Middle English. So again, also like kind of like with Italian, the double consonants are very common for these types of words. So L's, R's, S's, or N's can also be common. With some examples here are paddock. So you have the double D, fennel, which has the two N's, and then sallow, which has the two L's. So these double consonants are pretty common. Then the A sound at the end of a word in Old or Middle English will be usually spelled with an AY. So examples of this are belay and hideaway, where so that AY sound is used to make that, sorry, AY spelling is used to make that A sound. And then at the end of words, you'll have like soul. And if that comes at the end of the word, it's usually spelled with a STLE. So the examples are nestle, NESTLE, and then rustle, RUSTLE. So let's try like, I think we have one Old English example, or sorry, two. But this word is rough-hewn, which means crudely shaped.
So I have a question. When it's an old or a Middle English derived word, and essentially there are two words combined together, and say they both say that the first word ends with a certain consonant and the second word ends with the starts with the same consonant, you would include both of the consonants, right? When you were spelling them.
Yeah, generally. For this particular example, which I can talk about now since we have some inputs in the chat, is that the off sound can be spelled with O-U-G-H. So like cough, rough, tough, etc. And so you have the O-U-G-H from this first part, and then you have the hewn from the second part. And so that's why you end up getting the two H's, so R-O-U-G-H-H-E-W-N. So since this is a compound word, it's like two parts, two words that are combined, you'll get rough. So this H kind of belongs to the rough, and then hewn, so this H belongs to hewn. And so that's like, yeah, so the double consonants are common in Old English and also like can kind of be spelled in this way. Okay, one more example for Old English. This word is Wiccan. It's a religion influenced by pre-Christian beliefs and practices of Western Europe. Okay, lots of examples here. Or sorry, yeah. Sorry, that is wrong. This should be the I sound spelled with an I in Older Middle English. And so this final spelling is W-I-C-C-A-N. And again, you kind of see that double consonant with the CC showing up again. So yeah, that's that. Cool. Next language we're moving to is German. So in German, you have the A sound, which in German is spelled with an E or an EH. So two examples of this are Lebkuchen. So you have the A sound in Lebkuchen spelled with an E, and then Flamen. So that A sound is spelled with an EH. Next example, these two are can sometimes get a little bit confusing. If you have the E sound in German, it's spelled I-E. If you have the I sound in German, it's spelled E-I. And so the way I kind of remember it is that the second letter is like the letter that is said, basically. So I-E, E is the second letter that's said. So that's the sound that I-E makes. And then same thing for E-I. I is the second letter. And so it makes, E-I makes like the I sound. But some examples for the I-E being pronounced as E is Blitzkrieg, and then Wienerwurst. And then for the I sound being spelled as EI, Fahrenheit, so the H-E-I-T, and then Gesundheit, so the E-I-T. There's also like Einkorn, which is E-I-N-K-O-R-N, which is pretty much the exact same language pattern there too.
German, K is most common for the C sound, right?
Yes, that's true. Yes, and then also next language pattern we have is for the ch sound or for the sh sound even. German words use SCH. So this is pronounced schnitzel, spelled with an SCH and not an SH. And then kitsch is spelled SCH instead of like just a CH. So yeah, the SCH is a common spelling in German. Then for the V sound in German, it's spelled with a W, which can get kind of confusing, but this word would be pronounced Wedel, and then this word would be pronounced Edelweiss. So it's a V sound, but it's spelled with a W. And then the K sound in German can be spelled with a K, a CK, or a CH. And so kind of depends on the word. And German also sometimes will have roots that you can use to put to determine like which of those three spellings you can use. So like einkorn actually is a type of wheat. And so then you have corn. And so it's basically spelled with a K because of it's like the German spelling of corn. Kitsch is spelled with the K. Pickelhaube is spelled with a CK. Zwieback is spelled with a CK because it's kind of like part of the word back. And then echt is spelled ECHT. Then the last language pattern here is the S sound at the end of a word in German, which is spelled with the TZ. And so examples of this are like spritz and waltz, where the S sound is spelled with the TZ.
Oh, wait, so sometimes when I test myself with words, I will come across a word that says that it's of German origin, but then it will end up not using the patterns that were just mentioned.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to like kind of the rule, what I was saying at the very, very beginning of this presentation is like sometimes there are exceptions to these rules. And, you know, if a German word has more in English influence, or it says it's like German from English or German from Latin or something like that, then it might not feel like a pure German word. So yeah, these are rules, these are general patterns, but it doesn't apply to every single word ever. There are exceptions. Okay, let's try some examples. So word is German, and this pronunciation is Weimaraner. This is a German breed of dog.
Can you repeat the word?
The word is Weimaraner. Language pattern examples, the V sound is spelled with a W. So this sound at the beginning is spelled with a W. And then the I sound in German is spelled with an EI. So the Vi sound then would be spelled WEI. And so then your spelling is WEIMARANER for Weimaraner. Then another example, let's try Realschule. Okay. So the A sound in German is spelled with an E. So for Real, that would be spelled with an E. And then the sh sound in German is usually spelled with an SCH. And so that's why you get the spelling of Real, REAL, Schule, SCHULE. Also, German words will sometimes have like roots as well. And so Schule is the root for school in German. It's the word for school in German. Great. So Dutch, I think we have time. So yeah, Dutch is generally relatively similar to German, does have a couple of differences though. And so with Dutch, when you have the A sound, it can sometimes be spelled with an AA, sometimes with an O, sometimes with an A as well. And kind of just depends on the word and like what makes the most sense in terms of like where this is in the word. But advocat is a CAAT. Cockatoo is the COCK for that aw sound, and then yacht is A for that aw sound. For the E sound in Dutch, this can be spelled IE and it can also be spelled EE. So for example, Bonspiel would be an IE example, and then Kielhall would be an EE example for Dutch. The K sound in Dutch could be spelled with the K, C, or CK. And so I think the C is usually the most common at the beginning of words, and then the C and CK, or sorry, the K and CK are the most common at the ends of words. So trek, caboose, and hawk are some different examples of the K, the C, and the CK. In Dutch, double letters in general are very common. So like we saw advocaat up here, double A. The Some other words are waffle, mizzle, freebooter, with EOO. So yeah, in Dutch, there's a lot of letters that will repeat twice. So trying, I think, just this one example, the word is klomp, and it's a wooden shoe worn in Low Countries, and it's a Dutch word. Okay. The language pattern hint here is that klomp is spelled with an, the ah sound is spelled with an O. Also in Dutch, the k sound is spelled with a K. And so the correct spelling of klomp would be KLOMP.
So the ah sounds that are spelled with a U are rare in Dutch. Is that right?
The ah sound that is spelled with a U.
Yeah, so they're not common at all.
They don't happen in Dutch. No, I'm not sure what other languages that would happen into, but yeah.
Okay.
Okay, next language we have is Chinese. A couple of language patterns here is you have the E sound, which is spelled as an I. That's actually pretty common for a lot of East Asian languages, Chinese, Japanese, anything else that comes up. So Pidon, Chi, Liang, Renminbi. That E sound is spelled with an I. Then next language pattern, you have the I sound, which in Chinese is often spelled with the AI. So we have Haizai, and then Taipan, and then Laogai. So the I sound is spelled AI. The ow sound in Chinese is spelled with an AO. So examples are Dao, Diao, Yang Dao, and then Mao. And so that AU sound is spelled with an AO. And then the duh sound at the beginning of words in Chinese, or even the beginning of syllables sometimes in Chinese, which you might have just heard with some of the words I said here. Diao, ding, and then I think this is Zukun or something. But that T sound will be pronounced like a D. And so that's something to keep out for, or watch out for in Chinese words, is that can be sometimes really tricky, is that it sounds like a D, but it's spelled like a T in Chinese at the beginning of words. So let's try a Chinese example, Haizai. And this is a transparent gelatinous substance prepared from a red alga and used for stiffening cloth. Cool. Most people are getting the right answer. The I sound in Chinese is spelled with an AI. And so the spelling is Haizai, Haitsai. Cool. So then we have Japanese, again, somewhat similar to Chinese, but we'll have some differences. In Japanese, the A sound is pronounced or spelled with an EI. No, sorry. And so you see this in words like geisha, sensei, reiki, nisei. So that A sound is spelled EI. You also have in Japanese the E sound, which is pronounced with spelled with an I. So origami, tsunami, wasabi, sukiyaki. That E sound is spelled with an I. Then if you have the U sound, it's spelled with the U, and then the O sound is spelled with an O. So like very like the letters sound how they're spelled basically. So judoka, futon, bugaku, udon, mikado, zori, pachinko, kimono. So like the O is O and then the U is U. And so it's pretty straightforward in that way sometimes. Next language pattern is that the I sound in Japanese, just like in Chinese, is spelled with an AI. So bonsai, samurai, zaibatsu, kaiseki, spelled with an AI. And then in Japanese, the ka sound is pretty much always spelled with a K. There are very few C's in Japanese. So kimono, katana, kabuki, sukiyaki, all have the K letter for the ka sound. So some Japanese examples. Let's try the word odori. This is a lively dance. Okay. The hints for language patterns for this is that the O sound in Japanese is spelled with an O, and then the E sound in Japanese is spelled with an I. So odori would be spelled O-D-O-R-I. Yeah, relatively straightforward, relatively phonetic. Then one more example of Japanese would be haiku. And this is a short poem with 17 syllables. Okay, so you basically have in Japanese, the I sound is spelled with an AI, and then the U sound is spelled with just a U. We don't have to go fancy or do an OU or anything like that. In Japanese, it's just spelled U. So the correct spelling of haiku would be H-A-I-K-U. Cool. And then we have some couple of like fun languages at the end, a little bit more probably uncommon, but these are still good languages to know. So one of them is Hawaiian. And so Hawaiian is also kind of similar to Japanese Chinese in that like it's pretty phonetic. So the spelling you see is probably like very similar to how the word is pronounced. So in Hawaiian, the A sound is spelled with an E. So wahine, ukulele or ukulele, and then mele all have that A sound. In Hawaiian, the E sound can be spelled with an I or an E. So you have wiki wiki, emu, and then pahoe hoe. And so, yeah, in Hawaiian, the I is a little bit more common than the E, but they both occur. In Hawaiian, the I sound is spelled with an AI, also just like Japanese Chinese. So lanai, akamai, aikane, that's all spelled with an AI. And then the U sound in Hawaiian is spelled with a U. So kipuka, opelu, akule, all have that U spelling. Okay, so let's try one Hawaiian word. This word is mahi mahi, and it's a fish that's used for food. Okay, most people have gotten it. The language pattern here is that the E sound is spelled as an I in Hawaiian. So the correct spelling for this word would be mahi mahi, M-A-H-I, M-A-H-I. Okay, then next example or language we have is Arabic. So for Arabic, the A sound can be spelled with an A or an O. Kind of depends on the word a little bit, but mahal, fogara, and then hafiz. And so those are some examples. The E sound is spelled with an I. So you have Kashi, Hakim, Qatari, Murshid. Those are all words that words that have an I for the E sound. And then the U sound in Arabic is spelled with a U. So Bugala, Saluki, Mudir, Mujtahid. So Arabic is also, again, lots of how to spell Arabic is very kind of straightforward phonetic, but there are a couple of tricks sometimes. And so let's try one example here. This is Kamancha, and it's a bowed string instrument used in the Middle East. Okay, so this one, the main language pattern, again, very phonetic. The A is spelled with an A instead of like an O or something like that. I think the hard part that's tripping up a lot of people is this ka sound and what that second letter should be. In this case, it's an E. And so this is maybe a very like general language pattern in Italian, in Arabic, not Italian, in Arabic, that sometimes like the E will be used for that schwa sound. Yeah, generally speaking, yeah, or so Kemancha would be spelled Kemancha. And then one more Arabic example, you have cumin or cumin. This is a dwarf plant known for aromatic seeds used in flavoring. Okay, looks like most people are getting it. The U sound in Arabic is spelled with a U. And so the spelling is C-U-M-I-N, cumin. Okay, next language we have is Sanskrit Hindi. So for these sort of words, also again, relatively straightforward, relatively phonetic, but a couple of tricks, especially this second language pattern we'll talk about in a second. But the E sound in Sanskrit and Hindi is spelled with an I. So Basmati, Hindi, Tandoori, Dahi, and then Kisan are all spelled with an I. And then in Sanskrit and Hindi also, like there are some consonants like T's, B's, D's, K's, and P's where they'll have like a quote unquote silent H in them. That's just how the English dictionary pronunciation lists these words. Like, yeah, if you know Sanskrit and Hindi very well, like these sounds will be pronounced, but in English, that's kind of taken away and simplified. And so, yeah, they'll basically say like this will be pronounced like a T, B, D, K, P. So examples of this word is pronounced katak in the unabridged dictionary. So that H is silent. Balu, that H is silent. Dharma, H is silent. Samad, Gymkhana, Pansigar. So you can see those H's are silent in the kind of like English pronunciations of these words. And then the A sound in Sanskrit and Hindi are also spelled with an A. So Acharya, Tandoor, Barasingh, Kathakali, and then Lassi are how they're all pronounced in English. And so, yeah, so that's kind of the general rule for Sanskrit words and Hindi words. So let's try this example of Bic, Sanskrit and Hindi. It's from, yeah, and so it's a poison extracted from certain plants. Okay, cool. Most people are guessing this right. The K sound is spelled with the KH in Sanskrit or Hindi. And so this word is spelled B-I-K-H. One more example, let's try Mahayana, which is a branch of Buddhism.
Can you say it again?
Mahayana. Okay, so the language pattern here is that the A sound is spelled with an A. This is a pretty, you can kind of spell it how it sounds. So the correct spelling here is M-A-H-A-Y-A-N-A, Mahayana. Cool. Yeah, so that's the end of all of the languages that we have to go through. We'll kind of stop it here and see if anyone has any questions about anything we've covered so far or about language patterns in general.